Welcome to Grade 1 View, the podcast for future CRNAs by future CRNAs. A new series of Beyond the Mask supported by AANA.
Whether you're about to graduate from a nurse anesthesia program, trying to get accepted to nursing school, or you're somewhere in between,
this podcast is a resource and safe space for all things nurse anesthesia.
We're your host team. I'm Kevin Chem.
I'm Olivia Kahn.
I'm Charity Garno.
And I'm Larry Sears. So grab your Mac or your Miller, turn up your flows, and get ready, because this is Grade 1 View.
Welcome to Grade 1 View, the podcast created for future CRNAs who want a clear insight, real education, and honest conversations about the world of anesthesia. I'm Olivia Kahn, and I'm joined here today with Kevin Chem. Today, we're going to dive into the big, beautiful bill and what it means for the financial reality of future CRNAs. Joining us today are Dr. Greg Collins and Dr. Michelle Canale. Dr. Greg Collins serves as the Assistant Professor of Professional Practice in the Texas Christian University School of Nurse Anesthesia and maintains an active clinical practice in the Fort Worth area. He has had over 18 years of independent nurse anesthesia experience, with most of that time spent in high acuity, high volume obstetric practice. Greg is a veteran of the United States Army Reserves, providing downrange anesthesia in support of both Operation Iraqi Freedom and Operation New Dawn. He is a past president of the Texas Association of Nurse Anesthetists and currently serves on the AANA board as Region 5 Director. With us, we also have Dr. Michelle Canale, who has served as the Director of Nurse Anesthesia Program at the University of South Florida since 2017. She is a past president of the Florida Association of Nurse Anesthesiology and has served on the FAANA board since 2018. She has been a practicing CRNA for 20 years, including as Chief CRNA. With roots in practice, education, and professional leadership and service, Dr. Canale has had significant influence on the future of education and advancing nursing practice in the state of Florida. Within the AANA, she serves on the Education Committee as well as the AANA Board as the Region 9 Director. Welcome to both Dr. Greg Collins and Dr. Michelle Canale. We are so happy to have you here.
Thank you for having us. I'm excited to be here on our sister podcast. This is the first time for me crossing over. I'm happy about that. Can't wait to share a little insight with you guys and see what the world of Grade 1 View is like.
We're really excited. I can't believe it. And Kev and I are almost reaching what we said, a year here in the Grade 1 View realm of things. So we're so happy that we have you guys on as the sister podcast. And what a treat to have you join here today.
Yes, absolutely. And Michelle and I work on the membership committee too. And again, just a reminder of how small the anesthesia world is. So obviously, this is a heavy episode. I think kind of the storm is sort of dying down, right? We had this announcement come out, and of course, the Instagram memes were announced, and everyone was, set ablaze on social media, per se. I think really, as we were talking about prior to recording, a lot of this is sort of a nomenclature versus actual problem thing. Do you two kind of want to break this down in sort of a, I know it's a huge topic, but maybe in a more digestible level for folks who aren't as familiar or maybe just aren't as attuned to what these changes mean for us and our future?
Michelle, why don't you start us off there?
Sure. So as you mentioned, Kevin, there's a couple of issues here. One is the professional degree nomenclature versus, are we in that category or not? But the other part of this is the ability to borrow enough money in order to go to school to become a CRNA. A lot of people's, focus has been on this professional degree term. And, whether or not we're part of that group, we all know that CRNAs provide the full scope of anesthesia services and are completely interchangeable with their physician counterparts, physician anesthesiologists. So there's really no question there about the professional nature of what we do. Really, what's going to be important is whether or not current and future students are able to borrow enough money in order to pursue this track, to enter this profession, to become a CRNA. And that is the critical piece that we need to focus on.
Absolutely. Greg, what are your thoughts?
I agree with Michelle. I think that a lot of the hoopla that was kind of generated out of this has to do with the semantics of professional versus non-professional. I think, though, really where the rubber meets the road is the ability to borrow money for school. And I think that, the one big, beautiful bill definitely affects that. I think that it affects us negatively and affects our future negatively. And that's what we need to concentrate on. I think it's the details of the bill, what it means coming from the Department of Education, and really more importantly, what it means in terms of what we can do about it. The rules are not published yet. Once the rules are published, there will be an opportunity for the public to weigh in, and definitely a call for advocacy there.
We are going to have to pay very close attention to these calls for action. That is where we are going to be able to move the needle on this and make a difference. We have to explain this to, we've always said anesthesia is the best kept secret. CRNAs are the best kept secret. And here we are again, and people don't really fully understand who we are and what we do and exactly what that entails from an educational standpoint. But we are educated in a very similar method and way that physician anesthesiologists are. Our education is very expensive. We are being trained to be full scope anesthesia providers, and that requires expensive equipment. It requires very highly trained faculty who need, adequate pay in order to, that's often the rate limiting step, is getting enough faculty to train your future CRNAs. So, it's really important that we're able to have our students be able to borrow that money to come to school and receive that high level training, similar to what physicians receive when they come out and become physician anesthesiologists.
Yeah, no, definitely. When the bill first, when the news of it first came out, it really made me sick inside. It was, my initial reaction was, how dare somebody ever say the nursing profession is non-professional? It just made me relive COVID all over again, because, we went from healthcare heroes to now we're non-professionals, but moving over that sort of mental hurdle, then going into thinking like, oh my gosh, I could only, like, thank goodness I am graduating now, and I don't have to now like deal with now the future SRNAs are going to have to deal with, because I don't know what I would have done if I had to, have these constraints on how much money I could take out. Because, I ran into my program director on my flight home recently, about like a week or so ago. We were talking about how, like, just the cost of even like just simulation labs is a really important part of our learning curriculum. And that costs money to, keep it up and running and all that sort of stuff. So it's beyond me. And I could only imagine what are the future SRNAs, or anyone who's even just looking going into the field of nurse anesthesia, that it must be so overwhelming now.
Well, the current caps, with the lifetime aggregate amount that can be borrowed is $100,000 and only $20,000 per year. Currently, this is a 3-year program. I work at a public state university, which is among the least expensive for an in-state student in Florida to attend the University of South Florida. Our tuition is $72,000 for the entire program. That is not that expensive. It's probably one of the least expensive programs in the country. And yet this would not be enough money for a student to enter this program. And, we're on the low end of cost. So you figure our students cannot work while they're in this program, so they have to live on this money as well. Even $20,000 a year doesn't cover rent these days, let alone other expenses, tuition, books, and supplies.
I think that's the biggest hurdle, is people not understanding. Like, I think the one comment you see on all of these posts by the AANA is, why don't you guys just lower tuition? And as you said, like, it's a lot more than just that. There's a lot more to it than it's just the tuition cost me to go. You just said it was $72,000. That's insane. And still that's very cheap, but it is like having to live for 3 years. It's not, even if you get a studio apartment, where I came up in Augusta, you need a lot more money than just that. That's just to live as a human being. I don't know if you guys have an opinion on that or not.
Oh, I agree. I think that's exactly the thought is not only the cost of tuition, but the cost of living and the demand that's put on you guys in terms of education. We ask, I think every program does, that you not work during CRNA training, because it's not only impossible, but would be a detriment to your training and a detriment to your education. And so by us asking that or demanding that in most cases, then we put an onus on you to, where are you going to come up with that money? How are you going to pay for dinner?
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. I mean, I don't know about most people, but I cannot live on ramen. It's just not it's not for me. But I mean, even going along with that, one of the things that I really loved about my program is the out of Houston sites. Like I was in Beaumont for a month, and that meant paying for the Airbnb out there and paying for the rent here in Houston. And then there was a month where I was in Snyder, Texas. And like these are such critical sites for students to be at where a lot of times like we're not like competing for cases. Like, I mean, whatever's the craziest thing that walks through the door, it's mine. So it's like, gosh, just now putting a cap on the $100,000, like, where are you even going to send people? Like, people aren't going to be able to even just go to like other sites.
I think that you mentioned it, Olivia, that $100,000 number is a little bit deceptive because if you really look at it, if we talk about a 3-year doctoral program now, which every program in the country is, and it's a $20,000 and 500 yearly cap, then it really caps it, at a little over $60,000. And I think that that's the real concern to me is the yearly cap versus the overall cap.
Yeah, I agree. And, we don't get any money from GME, graduate medical education funds. There's about $21 billion that go into GME funding. We don't get any of that. And that money is used to pay physician residents while they're in their programs. Our students are not getting paid while they're in programs, and they are doing residency 40 plus 50 hours a week, maybe even more in some programs, depending on the format. So there is no way for them to work, and they're not getting paid for the work that they're doing. And, it's very similar training than physicians go through, and we don't have that graduate medical education money, $21 billion a year to help us. So this is critical.
That's a good way to think of it, Michelle. And I think that I always frame good or bad kind of the business of anesthesia in terms of a competitive market. And the limit with one provider versus not having a limit or having a higher limit plus GME subsidization for another provider is really anti-competitive. And I think that's part of the way the AANA is going to attack this with the Department of Education is use that anti-competitive slant and just say that's a benefit that one provider has over another in an open marketplace. And I think that speaking particularly with this administration, that may hit home a little bit harder than some of our other talking points, because it does in fact kind of slant the playing field towards one provider versus the other. Again, unfair, obviously in my mind, but certainly anti-competitive in terms of the anesthesia marketplace. We don't think about the anesthesia marketplace a lot in training. We think about it in practice. There are, competitive and anti-competitive things that are up all the time in terms of supervision, AAs being thrown in there as well. But this is certainly an anti-competitive notch against us. And I think as far as I'm concerned, with the plea that we have to the Department of Education now and what we will have in the future, we really need to pay attention to that and push that anti-competitive nature of this.
Well, you're absolutely right, Greg. And, it's CRNAs that are providing most of the anesthesia in the rural parts of the United States. It's not the physicians. And I mean, the data's out there. The numbers don't lie. And also, it's not CRNAs that are defaulting on loans. There's less than a 1% default rate among CRNAs on their loans. So that is not an issue here either. We are a winning bet every time, every way you look at it. And I just feel like this is a whole big misunderstanding. We need to right the ship on this. We need to heed the calls to action that we'll be hearing from the AANA as soon as this rule drops. And I just want to encourage everybody out there to really watch social media from the AANA, watch email blasts coming out from the AANA, watch your anesthesia essential newsletters. We're going to be communicating from the AANA, and it's really time sensitive and important that everybody, this is going to impact you, even if you're almost finished with school. It's going to impact you as a future patient in the healthcare system. It's going to impact your family. It's going to impact your community. So we are all in this together, whether you're in school, graduated, if you are a person who needs healthcare, a person who needs healthcare, this issue is for you, and we need everyone all hands on deck.
One, I think there's a lot to unpack here, Michelle, and I love all these directions, and I feel like we need to expand on every single one of them because you made such really great points. But yeah, I mean, every single time that I went to any open house for when I was thinking about going into CRNA school or thinking about which school I wanted to apply to, everything was this is the number one return on investment. You're investing on yourself, and you will always get the reward. You will pay off those sons, and it's a very large reason as to why I'm not having nightmares every night about my bank account problem because, I've been living off of loans for the last 3 years. But with all that being said, are there little, like for someone like myself who's not digging through the news and reading articles every single day because, I have to go to clinical and do other things and study for boards, are there little things that our listeners should know about that is in regards to this bill coming out that may not be in, the headlines, that may not be in, the memes or on TikTok or whatever? Like, are there any little critical points of knowledge that they should know about in regards to this bill? And then if both of you can just continue to expand on what can we expect from the AANA, or how did they first interpret everything, and where are we all moving forward as a unit?
Regardless of whether somebody is new to this topic and they just haven't been paying attention or just were, busy maybe in school studying for their next exam, the AANA is going to provide everything that you need to know in that media, social media, emails, newsletters. Just keep an eye out for those things. They're going to tell you exactly what the latest updates are, and they're going to tell you exactly what you can do to help. They make it very easy. They create some form letters. You can edit them if you want to. If you have personal experience that you can create your own little thing, you can change it up just a little bit. That's always helpful because every letter that's a little bit different is counted individually. So AANA will make it very easy, even if this topic is new to you. Just pay attention to those calls to action.
Completely agree. And I think to echo that, Michelle, what I would say is the advocacy work that we do on the AANA board, that our DC office does, working directly with the Department of Education, working directly, with the people on the Hill, with the administration as we know it. Most of that advocacy work is not going to affect Michelle and I's practice. And particularly with this bill, is not going to affect Olivia and Kevin. What it's going to affect is the people that are looking to go to CRNA school right now. And so it's always about planting the seeds and planting the trees that we'll never see the shade of. This is a little bit more in detail because it'll have an immediate effect on nurse anesthesia training, the ability to pay for it. But as you guys, both Olivia and Kevin, have mentioned, it's not going to affect you. In fact, one of the things that was interesting that I read going through the bill earlier is that if you're enrolled in the federal loan program up to, I think, June of 26, if you're enrolled before then, it won't affect you either. So once you're enrolled in the program, those caps will be set as what they are now, not what they're proposed to be. And so I think that's important maybe for the listeners that are just beginning their education and still have money to borrow, and maybe even those that are scheduled to start a program maybe in January. That's when our program starts. And so it's not that immediate group that'll be affected. But again, the advocacy work is not for us and not for you guys. It's for the people that are coming behind us. And I think that's what's really important to know. I think in terms of the bill overall, I think we've mentioned the big things. The yearly cap that's established is the big concern, the $20,500 that you can borrow per year. That, again, being on the federal side, the subsidized and unsubsidized loans from the federal government. I should put in a little bit of fresh air here. We've been talking about kind of the stink that's coming off of this, and a little bit of fresh air. There's still plenty of borrowing opportunities. There are private borrowing opportunities with the limits that are up to the institution loaning you the money, not up to the federal government. There are still ways around this and still ways to finance this. I'm interested to see what it does in terms of prospective CRNA students. I think that, our occupation right now is growing and making such headway that we want to see that continue. I know Michelle and I both probably have anywhere from 8 to 10 applicants for every seat that we have in our program. We want to continue that because then we're able to pick the brightest and the best and continue the good trend of education that we currently have. The concern is what does that mean for the future?
Right. And it was just a shower thought, literally, that I had. It's the one thing that I really do love about the nursing profession, and more so even, I feel like it really speaks volume to the CRNA profession, is how much we will go out of our way to care for one another. And I was just thinking to myself, well, okay, maybe in like the next 6 months when I feel like, okay, I'm getting the constant paycheck and whatnot, and I feel better about my money status, financial status. Is there a way that like you could, I feel this is going to be a weird way to say it, but like, like foster an SRNA down the line? Like, is there stuff like that that maybe can be out there where it's like, sure, absolutely donate to, yeah, they're sponsoring an SRNA, where it's, yes, we can donate to the AANA itself, and that's equally as important. But are there little things out there where, you can, I don't know, help donate like $500 that could pay for like the gas for a month or something like that? I just don't want people to get deterred from getting into this profession just because of a money issue.
I'm envisioning a really sad commercial with sad
Yeah.
music in the
Yeah.
background. With a,
Yeah.
That's
with
why
a,
I said, I was like, fostering's not the right word. I know it's
an
not.
RRNA holding a bowl of ramen.
Yeah.
But I like the way you think. I don't know of any foster a future CRNA kind of programs. There are some earn while you learn type scholarships that or stipends that are offered by some anesthesia groups. That's nice if that was your plan all along. I always cringe a little bit at the idea of someone kind of selling their soul before they really see what's out there and see their worth. But sometimes it is a necessary thing in order to, it's a means to an end. Certainly the AANA has emergency scholarships, through the foundation, which is a wonderful benefit of the AANA. I know they've helped many of my students over the years. We've gotten hit with some hurricanes here in Florida. And some of my students have really benefited from the AANA Foundation emergency scholarships. But who knows? Maybe we'll have to produce some really sad commercials that we can run and have a fostering program.
We need Sarah McLachlan to sing in the
Yes,
Arms
right.
of an
yes,
Angel.
Arms of the Angel or
Yeah,
something.
while we're just
Yes.
looking sad in the library or something
Sign
like
Kevin
that.
and I up.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what we need to graduate to. Okay,
That's
we go from
I love it.
podcasts to episodes and commercials.
Yes.
Well, I think you guys kind of bring up a good piece here, because what this is we're in the face of a workforce crisis anyway. And so when we
Yeah.
talk about, and I think that's a good point that we'll make, and I think that the advocacy efforts through the ANA will make to the Department of Education, is we're already in a workforce crisis. I did a couple of clinical site visits today in both hospitals that I visited. The locums to permanent staff is almost 50-50 in both places. And it's
Man.
we're obviously in a workforce crisis. So
Uh-huh.
is this going to just pour gasoline on that fire and potentially make the crisis worse? The subsidies that the hospitals are paying right now are at an all-time high. Healthcare in general stands to be affected by this. And I think that we need to get that point across. In terms of, Olivia, again, like Michelle mentioned, I love your idea. The best ways to do that with prospective CRNA students, with current CRNA students, even with new to practice CRNAs, is to get them involved in the advocacy. I think that that's the big thing. This, more than anything else, I hope highlights to residents and future residents the importance of advocacy and the importance of the AANA, what we do for you in terms of the interaction with the federal government. I think this is where the rubber meets the road. This is the crux of what we do. That's why the AANA exists. This is, we say this a lot, but you guys have probably beginning to understand the concept of malpractice insurance, and this is practice insurance. This is us, giving to the AANA PAC, giving to the AANA Foundation, who does have those scholarships available, like Michelle mentioned. This is the ability for us to give back to that to ensure the future of our practice. And again, it's something that we have to consider as being a pay it forward, being a benefit of that. And the AANA is well positioned to work here. It's the advocacy efforts. The success of those sometimes has nothing to do with the effort that goes into them. It has to do with, politics, unfortunately. But I think that we're well positioned. I think that we will eventually make headway here. But more than anything else is the call to action. I think this is a perfect lesson for future CRNAs in terms of what the AANA exists for. What is our purpose? And this is our purpose, is to make sure that our practice is protected today, that our practice is furthered tomorrow. And when we talk about this, we're really talking about the future of the not only of nurse anesthesia, but we're talking about the future of the anesthesia workforce, the potential effects there in an already really crisis situation in terms of workforce.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's every hospital that I've attended, there's a shortage. The current hospital I'm at right now, there's like off the top of my head, there's actually 2 CRNAs that are like formal employees, and then the rest are locum CRNAs or AA. One of the reasons that I got so depressed when I was in the ICU was because of the fact that we had such a heavy nursing shortage. In my cardiac surgery ICU, we lost 80% of our staff, and everyone was expected to pick up the pieces and just keep moving forward. The surgeons had to operate, so on and so forth. And it was extremely difficult to just, work 6 days a week. And I don't want this to continue now into our beautiful profession. And I'm worried that it might, because now we're just going to have an even greater shortage.
And, we are able to turn out more anesthesia providers through the nursing track than the medical track each year. We're turning out about 2,800 future CRNAs from all of our 150-ish programs in the United States and Puerto Rico. I think the physicians are turning out somewhere just over 2,000 providers a year. So we're able to answer this call. We have been answering this call. We need to be able to continue to answer this call. And without us, we're really going to be in a crunch. And, as I mentioned earlier, CRNAs are not defaulting on student loans. The annual average income is about $271,000 a year. They're going to make the money. They're going to be able to pay back these loans, but they won't be able to get through their education without them. So we've really got to make sure that those in Washington understand and can fix this.
What do you guys think? I feel like whenever we would have capital days at school, they would always say, you're not one side or the other here. You are just strictly a CRNA. This is a very hot button topic, especially when, the headlines say Trump's big One Beautiful Bill Act caused this to happen. At the end of the day, like, that's very hard to avoid. I'm from the Midwest. I went to school in the South. You could definitely tell we have a very, I would say, diverse profession with a lot of opinionated people who I think, I get it. They want to go to bat for the person they voted for. And, they'll, I guess, say other things like, again, why is student debt so high? Why don't we just go back to an MSN instead of a DNP? Because that other year is a lot of money. What do you say to that? And I guess, how do you have conversations with that kind of situation?
There are glitches. I consider this like a glitch. There are bills that go through every year, whether it's at the state level or at the federal level, that have something in them that isn't quite right. And you can come back the following year and file a glitch bill. A glitch bill is just a bill to fix something that was unintended. It's a technical error. I look at this as sort of like a technical error. I think it's an unintended consequence. It's not political. I don't believe that anybody is trying to hurt nursing. I really don't. I've heard the argument that some of these predatory private for-profit BSN programs that are operating out of a strip plaza, down on the boulevard, and are charging exorbitant amounts of money to students who otherwise would not be admittable to other programs. This might be a way to stop that. And that makes sense to me, and I understand why somebody would want to do that. But again, I think that this was just an unintended consequence. I don't think it's political, and I don't think anybody really wants to hurt nursing.
That makes sense. Greg, what do you think?
Kevin, I think to answer your question, in terms of professional advocacy, I think we all have to put our personal politics aside. The only administration that matters to me is the one making the rules. And I think that that's what we have to pay attention to. And they're making the rules right now. And so I think that we have to understand. Now, in terms of kind of framing it and how we act on the advocacy, I think you have to understand where they're coming from. And I think the Trump administration has obviously had this modicum from the beginning of the second term in terms, think about Doge and what Doge did. I think this is along those same lines. And so what our DC office is great at is really framing the idea when we go to speak with the Department of Education, we're speaking with that mindset of, we know where you're coming from here, and here's what we can do to address that. And our education is cheaper than medical education. They don't subsidize our education like they do medical education. This is a way they see this as saving money when in fact it's hurting the workforce. And I think that if we can get that point across to the people that are making the rules, and whichever side of the aisle that is, whoever's in power is in power. And I think that in terms of professional advocacy, that's something that I've always had to consider. My personal politics are always on the back burner. When I go into a congressional office or I go into a state house office, it doesn't matter. It's, what do you think of CRNAs and why is that important? Not what do you think about my personal politics or what do I think about your personal politics? It's, what can you do for us to help us out? What can you do for us to help healthcare in general? And it doesn't matter what side of the aisle you sit on. It really matters in terms of where you sit, what are your powers to make the rules, to change the laws, and then let's work from there. I think that we all have to consider that. There's a lot of, this administration is certainly a little bit over the top sometimes in how they communicate things. And I think that if you're on the other side of that, or if you voted against that, in the presidential election, that's going to hurt your feelings. And sometimes you have to set those personal feelings aside and say, what does it mean for me as a CRNA, and what does it mean for the future of our profession versus, what do I feel about this particular person in office, or how did I vote? That to me is completely inconsequential because the election's over. We have midterms coming up. Now, again, that's something with the midterms coming up. What we need to do as CRNAs is we can have personal politics, but we need to understand, if there's a congressional race in your district or there's a Senate race in your state, how does that particular candidate feel about healthcare? What's their history involved there? And how can we position ourselves best with that particular candidate, no matter what side of the aisle they're on, to forward our profession and to move our profession along? That's a big lesson, particularly for the people listening that are new to this and new to this idea of professional advocacy. Is I may wear a hat or a color when I'm Greg Collins, voter in my congressional district. But when I go to the Hill to talk about CRNA practice, that hat comes off, and I'm a CRNA, and that's what's important to me. And what's important to me is the way you feel, the way you vote about the issues that matter most to our profession.
I can't agree with you more, Greg. There are other organizations, if you want to, help the red side or the blue side, but the AANA is for CRNAs, and it doesn't matter. Laws are made by both sides. You have to bring everybody together for your cause. Educate them and advocate for your cause with both sides. You can't do it with one side or the other. So I could not agree with you more. We have to have our CRNA hats on here, and that's all that matters.
Yeah, absolutely. So I just want to make it very clear for people listening, like, what consequences are coming if this doesn't get changed. Can you guys really lay that out? I know you said, Greg, you were saying you can always borrow from private institutions and that sort of thing. So it'd be fine with more interest probably. But, really tell me really what the biggest consequences are for our future, the future of our profession and our future residents, if this goes through and stays the way it is.
Basically, Kevin wants you to describe the commercial.
Yes, exactly. Describe how the commercial is going to look.
Sarah McLaughlin.
Yeah, well, the backdrop would be cold and dreary.
Yes.
There's going to be tears. There's going to be crying into the ramen. Yes, crying into the
and
bowl
it's cold.
Ramen.
It's cold. The corn's not fully cooked.
Yeah.
Well, I think the obvious consequence is the ability to pay for your education, and where does that come from? I think the beauty of unsubsidized federal loans is that the government pays for your interest while you're in school. The minute you borrow that money, the minute you sign that promissory note, the government pays for that interest until you finish school. A private loan or an unsubsidized federal loan, then you eventually will owe that interest. Now, you may not pay it while you're in school because obviously you have no money to do so, right? But that interest will just get tagged on to your, say you borrow $100,000, that, maybe potentially $4,000 or $5,000 of interest that's generated while you're sitting in school and training is just added on to that $100,000 at the end. Mm-hmm. So, eventually that money's going to have to be paid. I think that's kind of the big concern is, will you be able to borrow enough money to train as a CRNA? I think the answer is yes. I think there are other opportunities. Michelle mentioned the idea of the workforce, the shape that it's in now, the potential for anesthesia groups to help cover some of this in terms of potentially signing on a tuition reimbursement, a stipend. I think that the idea of borrowing money, aggressively paying it off with those high interest rates is something that I think residents and future residents need to consider. It's a good idea anyway, just in terms of, and I'm putting my dad hat on here, speaking of wearing hats, of don't carry around a lot of debt, get it paid off as soon as you can. You're going to make the money to do that. I do think the idea of having a big chunk of borrowed money that you pay off slowly over your 30-year CRNA career, I think that, that's what's in jeopardy here. And a good thing or bad thing, that's the concern. I don't think, Michelle mentioned early about the idea of tuition and the importance of that tuition money. I think that in any particular program, you get what you pay for. I think that the idea to pay faculty, to pay for your simulation labs, to pay for your clinical rotations, the agreements that have to go on there, that's not money that's used to fleece a prospective or a current CRNA student or resident. I think that every program obviously wants to keep their tuition very competitive. I think that's something that unfortunately probably won't change. It's like with tuition. Once that tuition is set, that's the toothpaste out of the tube, and it's very, very difficult to put that toothpaste back in, if not impossible. So while we have had an increase in tuition over the past several years, I don't think that's going to change a whole lot. I don't think tuition is going to get cheaper. I think what we have to do collectively through organizational means or through personal means is figure out how we can do this, figure out how do we, instruct or how do we advise prospective CRNAs to fund their education. The federal loans have always been a great opportunity there. We're limiting that now. And I think that if, as you mentioned, Kevin, if things don't change, then there's going to have to be alternatives. And I think that those alternatives will present themselves. I think whether it's personal loans, whether it's private loans, I think that those things have to pick up.
I agree. Where there's chaos, there's opportunity. And I think somebody will enter the space. The question is, what will the terms be? How high will the interest be? And so that's the question. You'll probably see more applicants who are going to want to save a lot more money before they enter school, which is going to slow them down on their trajectory and timeline to applying to school. We already see applicants that are saving a lot of money before they come to school because as it was, federal student loans isn't quite enough to live comfortably, not on ramen. So, it wasn't great before, and now it's going to get even worse if we don't fix this. But, I agree with you, Greg. Someone will enter this space. The question, the unknown, is what the terms of that will be.
Yeah, I worked way too much. Like I picked up a second job just to save enough money just to handle rent for the first year in Houston for moving out here, and literally actually even also paying for the moving company to move out here. And then now when I was looking at job perspectives and they were offering all these bonuses, one of the initial reactions I had in my thought process was, okay, how can I take this bonus and then either like save it, put it away, but also use it as a way to help pay off the loans? Do I invest some of it so that way it grows? Things like that, where it's just like you want to look at the back end. I mean, it's nice to have money in your pocket and, there's a pair of shoes I have my eyes on, but at the end of the day, like these loans really do need to get paid off. And that's like we've all been saying, but Michelle mostly has been saying that it's what the greatest thing about being a CRNA is that at least every single CRNA that I meet, it's like, oh yeah, I paid off my loans in like 5 years. I paid them off in 2 years. And it's just such a frequent theme. Whereas I'll speak to a ton of residents or senior residents, and even some attendings where they're like, yeah, I'm still working on it. And it's not to say that they have a poor lifestyle, but it's taking them longer. At least that's the general theme that I have gathered.
I'll say too, just in terms of the prospective CRNA students that are listening, that we're painting this picture of bleakness to some extent. The work that you do, as Olivia, as you've described, of saving ahead of time, the trouble that you go to of borrowing money, and the potential debt that you accrue while you're in school, at the end of the day, I think what's most important is it is worth it. It is worth it. This is a great profession. It's a phenomenal job. We're paid more right now than we ever have been in history. It's worth it for the amount of money that I make to do what I do. I'm blessed. I'm privileged. I look at that. I think that I want that to be the overarching theme here, is that in the end, the struggles that we go through to finish and to sit where you guys are sitting right now on the precipice of graduating and entering into this wonderful profession, it's all worth it. And I think that that's the theme that I want to come out of this is a bump in the road. This is something that I think that is definitely not meaningless by any stretch of the imagination. It's something that we're going to dedicate a lot of effort, a lot of money to from the AANA because we understand the potential meaning to the profession. But in the end, as an individual, if you're considering this, do it. It is worth it. It's worth the risk, the financial risk. It's worth the personal risk and the personal hardship, I think, that you put forth to get through school. You guys are getting ready to really step in and get to see the benefits of it. I think you're probably pretty worn down right now from the past 3 years, but just wait. I mean, it is a wonderful place to be. The people that we get to interact with every day, Michelle and I on a day-to-day basis, it is 100% worth every penny, worth every dollar, worth every drop of blood, worth every drop of sweat, and worth every tear into those ramen noodles. It's certainly worth it in the end.
Couldn't agree more, Greg. I've never met a CRNA who regretted their choice of going to anesthesia school. Very high job satisfaction, very comfortable life, very fulfilling role in healthcare, and one that I would highly recommend. I've never met anyone who regretted that choice.
Amazing. So last thing, just real quick before we go, what can we do as AANA members, as CRNAs, as RRNAs right now for this topic to ensure things go the way we want them to?
Look for the calls to action. Register for those alerts with the AANA and the CRNA PAC. Watch the newsletters, watch your email, watch social media. The AANA will be communicating in many different media forms, and it's important that everyone who hears this, chimes in and engages in that call to action, whether it's writing a letter to your legislator or meeting with them, or just being involved and making it known what needs to happen. Even if you think you're 2 years out from going to anesthesia school, you're really the ones that this will affect, not the people who are applying right now and getting in, not the people who are going to start this year or even a year from this spring. It's the ones who are 2 years out. So, but again, like I said earlier, if you're somebody who is going to need healthcare in the future, or someone who's going to need healthcare in the future, this topic is important to you. So just be engaged.
I agree. There are current calls to action. We'll put those in the show notes in terms of writing letters to your current representatives. Once the wording of the bill is published, which should be either the end of this month or early in January, then we're going to put out another call to action to where those letters will go directly to the Department of Education. It's really at that point, sometimes those things are just measured in numbers. This is the number for versus the number against. And so the details many times are less important, but I would encourage every listener to not only respond to the current calls for action, but be on the lookout for those, particularly when it comes to the Department of Education. The ability to voice your opinion as a voting citizen, as someone who the Department of Education is meant to represent, is extraordinarily important. And I think that once that call to action comes out, pay attention to that, respond, get all of your family members to respond, get every person that you come into contact with that's talked about going to CRNA school. That's the people that they need to hear from, because that's the ones that are going to be affected. Again, it's not any of us on this podcast right now that will be affected. It's the future students, the future residents that will be affected. And so that's the ones that they really need to hear from.
Well, Grade 1 View listeners, you heard it here first. And if you need to replay the last, 2 minutes, absolutely do so. Well, thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Greg, for coming on board. I genuinely appreciate having you here, and I know Kevin does too. It's been a wonderful discussion.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you again.
All right, till next time, folks.